Hey, and welcome to VoiceOver, the movies that move you. Today we're doing something that is of incredible interest to me, so I hope you love it too, which is to talk to people about religious representation in media. So if you've ever wondered, why is the Protestant priest always a creep in movies? Or why are Muslims always portrayed as terrorists? Or why in mainstream movies are the only stories about Jews focused on the Holocaust? Or why do independent films from evangelical filmmakers only have male protagonists? Well, then today's discussion is for you. Back when I was an academic, my research was focused on religious representation, specifically Muslims in France, Hindus in India, and Mormons in the USA. And it's something that I still have a keen interest in. So every so often, you'll hear an episode of VoiceOver where we talk about a current film that wants to use Islam or Judaism or another religion as a backdrop to some kind of story. And we'll analyze how the film uses religion and spirituality in its characterization, plot, and themes, as well as the focus of cinematography and set design, costuming, and other aspects of mise-en-scène. Is religion portrayed authentically, honestly, informed, and accurately? Which means, does the film take the experiences of religious people seriously enough to do their research and find out the nuances of religious life? We're not necessarily recommending these films, but instead, we're investigating what the film has to say about faith and religion, and usually about a specific faith and religion. And for these episodes, I'll be bringing in my friend Ian Puente. You heard him on our episode about Arrival to host with me. Ian is currently a partner with Intention Industries, but before that, he worked with what became MGM Plus, and before that, he was chief counsel at Samuel Golden Films. So he's a seasoned industry professional who loves a good movie. Our movie today is Conclave. You probably heard a ton about it. Released in 2024, it was nominated for 8 Oscars and eventually won for Best Adapted Screenplay. It's a story of intrigue and politics, using the election of a new pope as a way to explore ego and the drive for power among an insulated group of powerful men. In this case, a group of Catholic cardinals. Ralph Fiennes plays Lawrence, the cardinal who must manage the election process and negotiate the grasping of the progressive Bellini, an American cardinal, the traditionalist Tedesco, as well as a Nigerian hopeful named Adeyemi, and Tremblay, who might or might not be a master manipulator. A nun shows up here as well, Sister Agnes, but she is one of the few women in the film. Introduced into this group of consummate insiders is Benitez, who was secretly made a cardinal by the previous pope and will become the dark horse running. Ian and I are speaking with Justin Petrisek, who joins us from the University of Notre Dame. He is the De Nicola Center for Ethic and Culture's Research and Publications Program Manager. He's taught literature, criticism, and film analysis at both the Catholic University of America and George Mason University. His current research follows the intersection of film, philosophy, religion, and culture, with a focus on, among other things, the relationship between film, the papacy, and the Catholic Church. Just a reminder, we will discuss the entire story and the surprising ending, so if spoilers make you itch, know that we're diving right into all plot points. So we're going to talk about Conclave today, which, since I think we've set this up, has gotten 8 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Editing, Best Production Design, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, and Best Costume Design. Directed by Edward Berger, a German whose most famous film is All Quiet on the Western Front, but he has been directing film and TV for 25 years. And then it's based on the novel by Robert Harris, which was published in 2016. And I'm just going to read this thing from Robert Harris that he said recently to the New York Times. Fundamentally, I think the story is sympathetic to religious faith and to Catholicism in particular. It's written from the perspective of an insider rather than an outsider, of a man struggling to do the right thing. As one of the cardinals say, we serve an ideal. We cannot always be ideal. So I just thought I'd open with that. What do we all, as religious people, think of that? And then Justin, as our resident Catholic on board, what do you think of that? So Justin, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so sympathetic. That's a word. I think the insider-outsider status is clearly Berger's trying to set that up. Whether or not I believe Cardinal Lawrence and these other cardinals are representative of actual insiders, what a cardinal might look like, we can get into that. But I was almost curious, just even to step back further, coming into this, what did either of you know about papal conclaves? Or is it just complete mystery?
I knew about the white puff of smoke.
Yeah.
And I knew that everybody's in a room hashing it out. And everyone has to agree. Is that correct? Or does he just have to get a majority?
2/3 majority is the current rules, yeah.
Okay, so not that much. That's I didn't know that much, yeah. And I have a quote actually from Edward Berger who says, "The mechanism behind the election of a pope is among the most closely guarded secrets in the world. I was super curious to peek behind those locked doors and find out details. We can't know everything, but there are quite a few facts that we were able to establish through our research. We feel we got as close to the truth as anyone ever has." So obviously, for him, it's part of, I'm going to peel back the layers and show the inner workings. That's part of what he's trying to accomplish.
There's actually a lot we know about these papal conclaves. Basically, what we don't know is who specific people voted for, and they're not supposed to reveal that. But there's a lot we know about conclaves. This film has pulled from previous conclaves for actual plot points. And it's funny, like as a cradle Catholic, like I grew up Catholic, conclaves, while I haven't lived through many, I've lived through 2. And it was just a very normal thing. Okay, they go behind a closed door. They elect a pope, white puff of smoke, like you said. But there's so much that's been written about conclaves over the recent decades. And then all the procedures are up on the Vatican website. You know, that they're totally public. John Paul II, I think in 96, adjusted some of the rules. Pope Benedict after him, Francis after him. It's something that's evolved over the centuries, over the millennia, but these rules have been laid out for a long time. I think that kind of ritual keeps people fascinated, but there's a lot that's readily available to us.
And to talk about costuming, I think one of the moments in the film is when Lawrence, who's our main character, is being clothed, being robed. I don't know what he's being robed in, but he's being robed so that he can go in front of the conclave and begin it. And so there is this real emphasis on like the ancient nature of what is happening versus, here's an image of a pope vaping right against a wall. And here's everybody collecting their phones and their iPads. So there is that sort of, this is a modern church with ancient vestments, or that obviously is hugely at play. Ian, when we talked about this movie, you said to me you felt like there were genuine moments of spiritual experience in the film. So do you want to talk to us about that a little bit?
You put me on the spot. Yeah, obviously I cannot speak to the veracity or the authenticity, and certainly I'm sure a lot is sensationalized for this, obviously, including up to and including the ending, which we can talk about in a bit. But for me, I think the reason why it largely felt spiritually affirming was the fact that it comports very well with my notion of revelation, which is Paul's writings to the Corinthians. We see things through a glass darkly. We do the best we can with limited human knowledge to fulfill the will of God. And ultimately, I think the script indicates, the story indicates that this was God's will. This particular outsider papal candidate becomes the Pope, right? With a message that is much more spiritual and less political in nature, right? So I think that for me, I enjoyed that overall takeaway message, but I can understand how folks that are more on the inside of Catholicism would maybe have some different takeaways from that. So
I actually have to say, when I was rewatching this last week to get ready for this discussion, the first thing that struck me was one of the first lines of dialogue, which is when Bellini is saying, "Can I have the chessboard?"
Hey, do you think that anybody would mind if I took that as a keepsake?
Of course, take it. He would have wanted you to have it.
Because we used to play quite often in the evenings. He said it helped him to relax.
And who won?
Oh, he did. He was always 8 moves ahead of us.
I used to always play with the Pope. He was always 8 steps ahead. And then there came all these moments in the plot where it's like, wait, did the former pope plan this? So like when it's like, oh, I'm going to have Tremblay request this sister come in. Tremblay says the Pope asked him to do that, right? And I'm going to place this person in Kabul, and then I'm going to have that person come in. And so I started thinking, like, is that choosing of the cardinal, is that really what the Pope wanted? The previous pope, and he's been planning it all along, and it's less about revelation but more about the machinations of getting. That's what I felt like the hand of the pope from the grave. That's how I started reading this. I don't know what you thought, Justin.
I lean towards the like this. I feel like Berger's really treating the cardinals more like senators in this case. It feels more like the West Wing, this kind of sensationalized workplace drama where they are political machines rather than believers. It's funny, on the last rewatch, I did a count how many times Jesus is mentioned. Do you want to guess how many times Jesus is mentioned in this film?
I'm going to go with under 5.
That sounds about right to me, too.
Yeah.
One time.
Oh.
One mention. And the irony of the mention is during Cardinal Lawrence's homily, where he actually misquotes Psalm 22.
Certainty. Certainty is the great enemy of unity. Certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance. Even Christ was not certain at the end. Dio mio, perché mi hai abbandonato? He cried out in his agony at the 9th hour on the cross.
He says Psalm 22 is actually Jesus on the cross doubting in his last moments. And any biblical scholar knows that Psalm 22 is actually a psalm of deep trust, that even when times get the toughest, God will be there. So I think the film really plays its hand when it says Jesus one time, and the one time it's trying to push this idea of doubt. Certainty is the enemy of unity. We need a pope that doubts. And that's not to say that doubt isn't a very real part of our faith lives. It is. But to hold that up as the ultimate virtue in this film, which the film does, I think is a little misleading. And that's where I felt it was more of a political drama than anything else.
I do have to say, I identified very much with Lawrence, right? Here's someone who's trying to do his job. He's trying to do it correctly. He's feeling hurt because he has a vision for what his future should be and feels like the previous pope has underestimated him. And yet, he's going to do the very best he can in this system that he has devoted his life to. So I'm part of a church with a huge institution, and I've had that experience too, where I feel like, okay, I'm just going to do the best I know how to do, and I'm just going to try, and I'm going to work with what I've got. I'm going to work with the people I've got, and maybe we don't all get along. And you have those moments when you're like, are we the body of Christ? Doesn't always feel that way. So I really identified with that character, and I felt an incredible amount of sympathy for him. But I think as all the other characters are gathered around him, it feels like sharks in a feeding pool more than folks with a earnest attempt to do what is right for millions and millions of people. So.
Right. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, when you have a papal conclave like this, and I think we should almost even say that we're recording this, end of February, with Pope Francis currently in the hospital. There's a lot of discussion. Will there be a papal conclave soon? When these conclaves do happen, there is actually a period right before they are sequestered where they have these conversations amongst each other. And they have very real conversations about what's the state of the church, what are the obstacles right now, what qualities do we need in the next pope, and they have those open conversations. The two things you're not allowed to do is say, you should vote for this person, or reveal, I voted for that person. So whether we want to call it politicking, campaigning, they have these very real conversations before they go in and actually cast their ballots.
Which is reassuring, I think.
It is. If they were going in and casting ballots without having these conversations, I would be really worried. Yes. This film makes it seem more secretive, like they're off hiding in a corner having this conversation, and this faction against that faction. And that's not to ignore it. Like, the people could have certain political leanings, even within the Catholic Church, but these are open conversations that they have. We know that Pope Francis stood up and gave an impromptu speech during the last conclave talking about being a friend of Christ and needing to take Christ to the peripheries and to evangelize, and that the next pope needed to be someone who was very close to Christ. And that became an inspiration for voting for him, and something that this movie even cites. Cardinal Benitez stepping up and having this impromptu speech.
When you say we have to fight, what is it you think we're fighting? You think it's those deluded men who had carried out these terrible acts today? No, my brother.
At the same time, Pope Francis, Cardinal Bergoglio at the time, speaks about Jesus and the problems of the church. Benitez does not mention anything like that. It's a political kind of racial injustice monologue. Right. And so it's just like two very different portrayals of the church, but we get to see this kind of all play out.
And that's Benitez's speech is in response to Tedesco, who is supposed to be this staunch conservative traditionalist. Also, another thing that I noticed, again, not as an expert, but when we have a Nigerian cardinal not talking about what's happening in Nigeria and over the last 25 years, how churches have been burned there and people have been kidnapped and priests have been killed, and like it seemed like really shallow understanding of what all the different things that are happened. So that when the Kabul cardinal stands up and says, "Oh, I've seen war," I wanted to say, well, a lot of people in this room have seen war and have been a refuge for the people in their area or have been victimized themselves. So it just seemed like there wasn't enough knowledge about what's happening in the world and how the Catholic Church has been present in those places.
Absolutely. And I think there's a version of this film that digs more into those realities, but these characters are reduced to one party line or one issue. When you have 100, I think in this film it's 108 voters. Currently we have 138 cardinal voters. But when you have 108 people and you have to eliminate people as candidates, you have to, just the machinations of a screenplay, you have to reduce them to an idea and push them to the side. But that's certainly not my experience of cardinals and bishops in the church. And they would be the first to step up and be like, yeah, and my country's at war as well. I've been ministering in these places. And there'd be a lot of people that would stand up when any of these issues were presented. Even the way Benitez is introduced, this surprise, oh, he's a cardinal, we've just found out. He's been made cardinal impectore.
Ignorance. An issue. Oh, dear God. One of them's died. I'm sorry? Have we lost a cardinal? No, Your Eminence. We seem to have acquired one. I mean it literally. Another cardinal has just turned up. Well, then we've left someone off the list. He was never on our list, Eminence. He says he was created in pectore. Oh, no, and he has to be an imposter, surely. Well, that's what I thought, Eminence. But Archbishop Mandolf has spoken to him.
That's another instance where a little research, he would not be allowed into the conclave. When a pope dies and it hasn't been made public that this person was appointed a cardinal, elevated to a cardinal, that appointment kind of dies with the pope. So this happened with John Paul II. He elevated 4 cardinals in pectore. The last one was never revealed. When John Paul II died, that kind of elevation died with him. There would certainly be among those cardinals in the room, canon lawyers who stand up and be like, wait a second, in pectore,
Right.
But there is a version of this film where I think you get into those actual issues of faith and what these bishops are dealing with in their respective flocks around the world. And yeah, it's certainly a film that takes itself seriously, but maybe not its subject matter seriously.
I know, Justin, you wanted to talk about the confession scene with Sister Lanumi.
Well, good afternoon, Sister. I would like to speak to the nun who dropped her tray just now.
She's safe with me. I'm dealing with the situation
I'm
here.
sure you are, Sister Agnes, but I must see her myself. Sister Shanumi, now it's important you tell me anything that is in your heart or that is troubling you insofar as it relates to Cardinal Adeyemi. Can you do that for me? Even if I give you my assurance it will go no further than this room. Would you like me to hear your confession?
Isabella Rossellini as Sister Agnes trying to keep Lawrence out of her little office. I did kind of want to talk about this. She's gotten a lot of good press, but I ultimately felt like she was massively underused. Like if you're going to have Rossellini in a movie, let's give her more to do.
They give her
You
like
know?
two speaking, like two scenes really where she
Right.
speaks,
Yeah. This is where she says, this sister is my responsibility. And then Lawrence forces his way in. And then we have him trying to ask the sister, hey, what's going on? And finally, he resorts to saying, do you want me to hear your confession? There are lots of things going on there. And then we have a quote unquote a confession that we're not witness to. So, Justin, what do you want to talk about with this?
This is really, for me, where the character of Lawrence is revealed. And there's certain things that the film signals to us. There's certain things that it doesn't. If a cardinal who would know all these rules of canon law, they know the rules around confession and the seal of confession. So if you confess to a Catholic priest, they are not allowed to act on any information. They are not allowed to reveal. That is completely secret. If they were to reveal or act on it in any way, they would be automatically excommunicated from the church. Now, that doesn't mean they're unbaptized or anything like that, but their faculties would essentially be removed. And so when Cardinal Lawrence sits down, and we don't see this even in the closed captioning, but in the screenplay, it actually says a moment of inspiration strikes him. And then he asks, would you like me to hear your confession? And so this is borderline evil that he is, this moment of inspiration, I can get this information out of her if I hear her confession. And then what does he do next? He goes to Cardinal Adeyemi and then reveals, hey, I know this. And he immediately acts on it. And then even in that next scene, we'll say, I'm bound by the seal of confession, which he's already broken. So like there's a political thriller here where Adeyemi still tries to hold on to power and says, you broke the seal of confession. I'm going to take you down with me. But it's played rather as Cardinal Lawrence is managing the situation, but he is violating not just the seal of confession, but his vows as a priest. Right. And he's taking the confidential sins of a child of God and just using that for his own political maneuvering. Now, I don't know if the film portrays it in that way, but that's certainly how it comes across. This reminds me of the storyline in I Confess, Alfred Hitchcock, where Montgomery Clift plays a priest who hears the confession of a murderer, but that murderer has also framed him. And so Montgomery Clift, his conscience is racked the entire film. Do I save myself from being accused of murder, or do I break the seal of confession and reveal who the actual murderer is? Lawrence doesn't seem to grapple with that at all. He just, I'm going to hear this confession, take this information, and use it to my own ends.
That's really interesting. Watching it, I didn't know any of that, what you're talking about. I saw that kind of moment of inspiration where I was like, I see what he's going to do. He wants to be able to talk to her, and he wants to be able to make her comfortable by couching this as a safe space.
Yeah.
But then I thought, she's a nun. Wouldn't she have confessed this already? Why would she still need to confess? Like, in my brain, I was like, I'm not sure how confession works, but I would think that she would have dealt with these things, gone through whatever process needed to be gone through well before this moment. And then and in my mind as a woman, to say, why don't you confess to me what's going on, when we later find out Adeyemi is much older than her.
We were very young. No, Joshua. She was very young. She was 19 years old. You were 30. Thomas, listen to me. Please.
It seems like things were consensual, but he's in a position of power. There was all these factors to it that I was like, I feel really uncomfortable now that he framed it as a confession instead of just...
This movie wants you to feel the uncomfortable moments, wants you to feel the kind of manipulative moments. It doesn't want you to think too deeply about it. We don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of canon law and this and that, but we want you to feel a certain way about these characters. And then in that light, it's very effective.
And that's interesting about Adeyemi, because I started ranking in my head, like, okay, so is the film telling me who's worse? Are they ranking the violations here for me? So is Adeyemi having this prior sin bad, but not as bad as, say, as Tremblay going through and doing this behind-the-scenes manipulation of that? And is that not as bad as Tedesco standing up and thumping for white supremacy, basically, throughout the film? I don't know if you guys got that sense from the script, that they were trying to rank things for you. We find out something's bad, but this is worse.
It was Italian supremacy, which, is always interesting to try to argue with. But no, I think it absolutely was that Adeyeme's sins were the lower end of it. Tremblay's machinations were more sinful. And I always forget the Italian cardinal's name again. What is his name?
Tedesco.
Tedesco, and then you have Bellini, who's Stanley Tucci. I think, is he supposed to be an American in this film? Is he supposed to be Italian?
Yeah.
I think in the book
I
he's
think he
Italian, but
He's definitely American in this one. Italian American.
We should talk about Bellini because to me, he's really interesting. He's, no, I don't want it. But then you're like, oh, but you do.
you really do.
And there's this sin of pride. And then for him to attack Lawrence, that was really interesting. Like, you were trying to get this, and Lawrence is like, no.
If you want to defeat Tedesco...
This is a conclave, Aldo. It's not a war.
It is a war. And you have to commit to a side. Save your precious doubts for your prayers.
Yeah, so...
Forgive me if I mislabel this, Justin, but there seems to historically be a more progressive contingent and a more conservative contingent even within leadership of the Catholic Church. With your familiarity, how are those different factions, how do they interact with each other? How do they disagree with each other? How do they find common ground with each other? I'm curious about how that process works, because obviously there have been more conservative popes and more progressive popes, Francis probably being slightly more, at least from the outside perspective, viewed as a more progressive pope than certainly Benedict was viewed. But there clearly is that tension. I think there's tension in all faiths where how much do we change with the times and how much do we plant our feet and say this is where we stand?
I think it's really interesting just reading Pew surveys, right? Every once in a while there'll be some survey that says 75% of Catholics approve of the Pope. And in my mind, based on thinking of who approves of the president of America, I'm always like, wow, he's doing great. And then, and then Pew will be like, not good. And I'm like, really? This sounds amazing. But there's that whole American Catholic understanding of what should be going on versus other places in the world. Yeah, so talk to us, Justin.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing because especially within the American church, we can tend to politicize it a little bit more, talk about the politics of it, talk about the progressive side versus the conservative side. But Heather, to your point, it is a world church. And so oftentimes when these bishops get together, they're talking about the specific needs of their countries, their dioceses, their flocks. And so it does tend to gravitate more towards what are the needs of the church right now. That's different than the doctrinal conversations that happen where, oh, could the church change the teaching on this or that? Even Pope Francis, who's considered by many to lean more progressive as compared to Pope Benedict, the teaching on women in the priesthood, for instance, that will not change. He said it cannot change. So even he who's labeled as more progressive isn't doing what this film seems to almost suggest of, oh, could this be different in the future? Edward Berger, as he's been touring around campaigning for the film, has said on multiple occasions, what I was hoping to do was put a crack in the patriarchal church to see what the future could be like. And whether or not he successfully does that, who can say? The fact that he thinks certain teachings can change is a fundamental misunderstanding there. There are certain things that cannot change doctrinally, but how we approach and engage with others, each pope has their own style. John Paul II, for instance, traveled around the world more than any pope in history. He was very much about being with the people, engaging with the people face to face. Benedict was much more of an academic. So he wanted to situate people in the truth and really show the rootedness of the faith. And Francis, as his Jesuit training suggests, he's more attentive to the poor and to the social justice issues. So all of that gets then politicized within the American church, within the global church. So it's a constant, I don't want to say battle because it really isn't a battle, but it's a constant conversation.
It's a great point that you make, Justin, as well, that it is that distance that the outsider sees as major and significant is much smaller in reality than for the internal, because there is so much. It's like having that 98, 99% in agreement, but really focusing on that 1% and trying to make a point with it, I think is interesting. We get a lot of that in our faith as well. Certainly not to the degree that you do in Catholicism, because Francis is much more out there in a way that our prophet is not. But it's interesting.
One of the things I did want to talk about, you guys, is this balance between the institution versus the individual. What I saw as an outsider is the irony here is that the people, the individuals, would actually normally represent the institution out in the world. So what does the film have to say about institutions? The Catholic Church is the stand-in here. And then what does the film have to say about individual spiritual experience?
Ian, you want to start with this one?
Neither of us want to jump in first.
It's a meaty one.
It's an interesting point. Obviously, I think the message from the filmmakers is much more about bringing to bear the institution on behalf of what are more, I think, more generally held social issues, if that makes sense. Social and poverty and all of the sort of human elements, because obviously, as you indicated, Christ is mentioned one time in the entirety of the film. And not even by the guy that is framed as the most Christ-like, pure individual of the group. It feels to me that in many respects, that individual revelation, sort of personal revelation, is almost completely ignored in this. Is that God's hand, if you could even call it God's hand, as you pointed out, you could pivot it have it as the outgoing Pope's machinations to bring this to bear. But assuming that it's God's hand, that is much more of he's using this collective institution to bring to bear what he wants to bring to bear, not any individual person who's getting down on their knees and praying about it, right? And finding that answer from God about what God wants him to do in this situation, that individual to do in this situation. It is these different factions coming at cross purposes with each other and then ultimately landing where they're supposed to land, right?
With the help of a suicide bomber. Just
yes.
That in there. Like that was for me, that was one of the most heartbreaking moments, was not that there was a suicide bomber, but that Lawrence is, okay, I'm going to vote for myself. The whole thing explodes. Oh, I guess I wasn't supposed to do that. That was maybe the wrong choice. Anyway, Justin, what do you think?
Pretty heavy-handed letting him know you're not supposed to be the next pope.
You're not the
and next pope. I don't think the pope, the previous pope, that was part of his machinations.
I don't know if he planned that. That's probably safe to say. But the slow-mo, as all of that rock comes down, that was pretty awesome. I was like, oh, this is cool. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, there's so many thoughts. Okay. There's a way in which this film, looking specifically at the cinematography, treats... I was almost reminded of a Nat Geo spread. We get these beautiful framed images. There's that image of all the cardinals with white umbrellas moving through the square. And it's treated in this very, like, I'm observing from the inside, but I'm watching these animals get ready to tear each other apart. And like when we talk about representation, we have to differentiate between the people being represented, the process or the institution, and then the idea underneath it. And I think what this film gets mostly right is the process. There are aspects of the papal conclave that they get spot on: the destruction of the ring, the casting of the ballots, the three scrutineers that sit up at the front. One reads it aloud, the other confirms, and the third one puts a needle right through it and creates a bundle. They do vote in the Sistine Chapel. They do put jammers for electronic devices so that no phones can be used, and they do seal up all the windows. But that leads to what I call the social network problem. When we take a real life person or historical event, wow, that's what really happened to Mark Zuckerberg. No, this is a movie. And even though we have the real process of the conclave, there are representations of people and problems within the faith that just are totally off the mark. So was it trying to say about the institution? And was it trying to say to the audience? That's part of what I've been trying to untangle ever since I first saw this.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the overarching philosophical question of what is the highest and best purpose of a religious institution? What should be the mission of religious organizations? And it did lightly touch upon a few different areas, right? There's Tedesco, which is much more the West versus the rest of the world. And then there was the personal mission of lifting the poor. I would argue that it is sort of that edification and improvement of the individual. And then ultimately, through the individual, it improves communities and nations in the world. It is sort of helping to lift the individual. At least my poor emulation of Christ, I think that is what he did, right? It was much more about the individual person, less about we're changing society. And I think for me, that was what was an undercurrent. I don't think they did a perfect job by any means of letting that be the centerpiece of the film, but that's one of my favorite things about films. Irrespective of what the filmmakers intended, there's messages that can be taken based on your own impressions and interpretation of things.
We're all readers. We're all reading the text, and we're all bringing to bear to the text our experience. And it reminded me of a friend who went and saw the Vatican this summer, and she was feeling all kinds of anger at the visible display of wealth and the pomp and the circumstance. And I thought to myself, another person in that same position and another person watching this movie might see that wealth, the beautiful clothes, the beautiful places, as in fact a confirmation. This is an institution that has existed for over thousands of years and in fact is important. And the visible cue that is important is here in the set design and in the costuming. And that this helps me understand that this is not something we lightly toss away. I found images so beautiful. You talk about it's a Nat Geo spread. I found them so beautiful and so this. There is something valuable here. There's a role that this institution has played over hundreds and hundreds of years for society. We don't have to agree with everything. We can say that there needed to be corrections from time to time. But to me, it made me go, this is not something I think should just be thrown out.
No, I completely agree. One of the things that resonated with me the most is whenever they have these insert shots and the attention paid to the small objects that represent our faith, the ring that Sister Shanubi is fiddling with, or the cutaway to bishops smoking. I've been in those squares. Those bishops, those cardinals, they are smoking a lot. And I haven't seen one vaping yet. I go to Rome next week. I'll let you know if I see any cardinals vaping.
I'd love to hear if that's authentic or not.
Yeah.
It's probably only a matter of time. I think
yeah.
It'll be
A
interesting
wonderful
to see.
comedic moment. That hit on the vape pen in the silence in that cafeteria when Tedesco, that's just on point. But those cutaways to those objects of faith, to the things that represent our faith at times, being in the Sistine Chapel, seeing those images, seeing even Lawrence looking up and the devil tugging someone down, it's all these little cutaways did resonate with me because it's those small objects that we imbue meaning into. And then I just wanted those characters to then talk about that faith. And we get the image, but we don't get the words. And on one viewing, I watched this film with an archbishop, and his first comment after was, never once do you see anyone pray. They might speak a prayer, but no one seems to be genuinely praying. And so that you lack that spiritual depth at times as much as certain aspects might resonate.
Well, there's two questions I still wanted to get to. One is, what does the reveal of the hermaphrodite add to or detract from the themes of the film?
The truth is, there simply was no reason to think I was physically different from the other young men. Then, in my late 30s, I had a surgery to remove my appendix. And that was when the doctors discovered that I had a uterus and ovaries.
I would start with the question to you, Heather, which is, I think the point, the ending with the reveal is that the feminine needs to be physically represented in the leadership of the church, not just someone who is sensitive to the needs of women as well as men. So as a woman, how was that message land with you?
I was like, well, he was still raised as a man. He still presents as a man. He still benefits from being a man. So I'm not sure how having a uterus has...
It was the least interesting part of the movie to me. So that's just me. But I'm a dude, and obviously I may be totally screwing this up. But as a guy, I was just like, did we need this ending? This does nothing. Anyway,
I felt like, oh, the movie's over. Oh, no, now there's an extra 10 minutes where we talk about this. Okay, but that doesn't really change anything because, again, he's not going to present himself to the world as I'm a hermaphrodite. He's still a man, right? In all functional uses of that term. So for me, it was like, I don't know that this matters too much. It didn't feel like it had any weight at all. I know that I read that audiences watching this gasped when that was revealed, but I was like, sure. Anyway.
I mean, it really does come out of left field. Like you feel like the movie's resolving and then it's like, oh, no, there's another reveal here.
From what I understand, it is in the novel. That this is part of the ending of the novel. But again, I just was like, okay.
Yeah, and I can't remember from the novel whether it's the reveal is that he's like there's hermaphroditic characteristics or if he's actually trans. I can't remember those specifics, but it's one of these things that definitely feels tacked on. It's interesting to hear that you felt like this was like one step too far, that this like almost wasn't even needed to make this point at the end, because on a canonical level, Benitez even suggests it himself. He's like, when I found out, I thought my ordination was no longer valid.
It was a very dark time for me. I felt as if my entire life as a priest had been lived in a state of sin. Of course, I offered my resignation to the Holy Father. I flew to Rome and I told him everything.
Which would be the case. And this isn't a new thing that the Catholic Church has dealt with. It's dealt with gender ambiguity for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it would have dealt with it in the same way it always has. It would have treated them with love and compassion, but the ordinations would not be valid. Now, to make the larger point of how is the feminine represented within the institution, you had Isabella Rossellini the whole movie, and you don't use her to speak to that in any way. There are ways that you can speak to that without, necessarily like pushing a progressive agenda, but to, then use the man who presents as a man and will continue. Is like to use that to try to make this point is mind-boggling to me. There was actually another ending to this film that we see in the screenplay where we follow Cardinal Lawrence walking down the street and the camera goes over this image of these souvenir shops with all these plastic pietas. And so Jesus being cradled by his mother Mary. And so like almost this image of the feminine embracing the church and the church needing to embrace the feminine. They decide instead to end on Cardinal Lawrence opening a window and these sisters pouring into the light, coming out the door, and literally on the nose, like when God closes the door, he opens a window. It's literally what they're screaming at the end here.
Yeah. In the film, there are those moments visually that are saying, look, women are present but ignored. Women are present but are subservient. Women are present but silenced. Women are like that is throughout the film. And Rossellini does have the one speech. Normally, I would just be silent here, but I'm going to speak up.
Eminences, although we sisters are supposed to be invisible, God has nevertheless given us eyes and ears.
I wish it were a better speech. I was like, oh, well, you kind of said something. But yeah, ultimately, that feels like a whole different movie than what this movie is. And I'm okay with that not being the main focus, right? I'm certainly fine with that. But I did think if this is supposed to talk about the feminine in the church, I'm not sure that it is achieving much for that discussion at all.
It was the most glibly handled portion of the entire project, in my opinion. It was just because I agree. It's absolutely a conversation worth having, but don't just sort of one note say women are seen but not heard in this situation. And the only way we're going to change that is if we have a dude who has a uterus as the Pope. Wait, what? It just was strange to me.
And wouldn't reflect the experience of so many women, right?
Correct.
I feel like the way it was handled is reflective of the moment we're in right now, which is, everyone will get what this means. If we just present it, everyone will understand what we're trying to say, and the work isn't being done to actually articulate any of it. I wanted to dive into this idea of how representation of the Catholic Church has changed, and I'm just going to mention just some I mean, there are hundreds of films, but I'm going to name a few. The Nun's Story, 1959, Audrey Hepburn, which I love. I don't know if either of you have seen, but she becomes a nun in order to become a doctor and then eventually leaves the church. A Man for All Seasons, 1966, huh? That one is we're standing up for what is right and moral against the political corruption of the time. The Mission, so that's 1986, and we have priests on the front line trying to help locals in a desperate situation. Doubt, 2008, we have a misbehaving priest being accused by a family, and we have the local institution closing in on that. Silence, 2016, this discussion of if we go and teach people the Christian gospel and then they're being abused and tortured and killed for that, what's our responsibility there? The Two Popes, 2019, we have a discussion between two popes about what the church should be doing. And those are just a few that I noted.
How did you leave out the young pope with Jude Law? That's a real barn burner, that one.
I thought to myself, what has he recently been in where I was like, oh, the young pope to this. It's a great segue, but I can't remember what I recently saw. All kinds of different genres. The presence of the Catholic Church functions in multiple different ways, but ultimately, what are we seeing in the portrayal of the church, portrayal of religious people? Should we be concerned? Does it matter? What do you guys think?
I think you've tracked what is a larger trend about treating religious individuals and institutions in film, which is a decline in nuance and, dare I say, affection. It's moved from some affection to
and I left
certainly
out
deeper animosity.
The Boston Herald
Spotlight
movie. I left out Spotlight because I thought Doubt worked in that way. But yeah.
I think generally speaking, yes, there are. I would argue as a religious person just generally, not speaking to any of these individual films, but there are certainly criticisms that are valid and merited and worth discussing. But at this point, the pendulum has swung so far to one extreme where it's very difficult to name anything recent where a person of faith, let alone an institution of faith, is depicted with anything other than outright hostility. It's really only fools or evil people that's all you really get in most treatments at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah. It seems there's two camps now. If Catholicism is going to be in a film or the backdrop, you either have an exorcist or demon-oriented film where, religion's just in the background, or
and
you
not
have
even able to battle the demon, right? This is what we saw in The Exorcist, and this is what we see in lots of exorcist horror is the priest is quickly dispatched as unable to accomplish anything, and the devil is much stronger.
Or that the faith community or the institution is actually the one pushing forward. You've got the newest Omen film, which high execution value, great looking, it's entertaining, but it's okay, we've got to bring this evil into the world in order to make us relevant again. That's the ultimate message. That is the worst possible message that you could put out there in the world.
So you either have that or you have what I would classify Conclave as the scandal film. Like this would cause scandal or this is about a scandal within the church. And honestly, it's a testament to how the world views faith, views religious institutions. They're only places for evil or scandal, and we're not going to engage with anything else beyond that. We're doing a film series here at the University of Notre Dame, and of all the movies we chose, modern movies, none of them deal with religion like head on. I think we chose Arrival as one of our films, Tree of Life as another. I think the only one that really engages like religion and specifically Catholic religion in this film is Of Gods and Men, which is a French film from 2010. Yeah. Why am I going and choosing Arrival? Because there's nothing else out there that's trying to engage the subject matter intelligently.
Yeah, and I think much to our detriment because most people still have a spiritual life. Most people still have connections to institutions of all kinds, but also religious institution. And to just assume that we're all on board with this portrayal. Or even worse, I'm going to reveal to you the honest truth and I'm going to disavow you of any of your naive preconceptions. It's just a bad faith actor in a lot of ways.
Honestly, one of the best examples I've seen in recent years is Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird. I think it's a phenomenal movie about how grace can actually act in one's life. And there is religion in that movie, and that she goes to a Catholic high school. And Greta Gerwig really did go to a Catholic high school in Sacramento. But we have this beautiful image of grace at work at the end, where Lady Bird she finally goes to New York. She's off to college. There's this whole attention throughout the movie on her name. What's been given to her, and she rejects that name. I want to be called Lady Bird, not Christine. She goes out to a party, has too much to drink, ends up, in the hospital. And they look down to her name on her wrist, Christine McPherson.
Hi, you've reached the McPherson family. Please leave a message. Thank you.
Hi, Mom and Dad. It's me, Christine. It's the name you gave me. It's a good one.
This moment of re-embracing that which was freely given to her, re-embracing her name. We have those moments in our lives, in our faith journeys, these moments of embracing that which is freely given to us.
I'm glad I got to speak to Justin about Conclave. There's a ton I didn't know or put together about the Catholicism in the film because, well, I'm not Catholic. So that was super, super helpful for me. But one thing still niggles around in my brain, and it's something we kept saying about Isabella Rossellini. But I'm going to have to explain some film theory to you. Don't freak out. Film theory has been oft-spoofed because some of those theories can be abstract and intimidating, but many aren't. I'm thinking right now of Stanley Cavell and how he leaned into the detail of films, whether mise-en-scène or performance, assuming that what we saw was meant to be there. And that's it. That's the whole theory. What we saw was meant to be there, and so contributes to the themes of the films. We can really put a lot of interpretive weight on what we saw. We don't just say, well, it was a shadow, who knows? We say, that was supposed to be there, and it means something. So we saw Isabella Rossellini, a powerful actress from a storied legacy. She's the daughter of famous Swedish actress Ingrid Bergman and Italian director Roberto Rossellini, stuck in the background, costumed almost to invisibility in her nun's habit, with so few lines that her supporting role became almost a mere cameo. And then we think, you have Isabella Rossellini. Why don't you use her? And that might be exactly the point the director wanted to make. If we have these powerful, experienced, thoughtful women in religious institutions, why don't we use them? Why do we render them almost invisible and silent? I've been thinking about that a lot too. Thanks again to Justin and Ian for discussing Conclave. Voiceover is a production of BYU Radio and is edited by Soraya Pearson.